I never expected to find love carved into the bark of 100-year-old trees, but that's exactly where Mason left it for me. I'm Reed, and I've been working as a tree feller in the Pacific Northwest for 5 years now. It's solitary work, the kind that gives you too much time to think, which is exactly why I took the job after college. I wanted space from everything, from everyone, from the expectations I'd been running from my whole life. The logging company I work for operates on a rotation system. Different crews work different sections of the forest, and we rarely cross paths. I'd heard about Mason before I ever saw him. The other guys talked about him like he was some kind of legend. He'd been working these mountains for over a decade, knew every trail, every stand of timber worth cutting. They said he was quiet, kept to himself, did his work, and went home. I figured we'd get along fine since I had no interest in making friends. The first time I saw him was at the equipment depot on a Monday morning in early October. I was loading my chainsaw into my truck when he pulled up in this beaten-down Ford that looked like it had survived 3 decades of logging roads. He stepped out, and I felt something shift in my chest. He was tall, broader than me, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that was more practical than fashionable. He wore the same flannel and work pants as everyone else, but somehow he wore them differently. He moved with this quiet confidence, like he knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. He nodded, just this small acknowledgement, and then he was past me, grabbing his gear. I stood there like an idiot, my heart doing this weird stutter step I hadn't felt since high school. I told myself it was nothing, just surprise at finally seeing the guy everyone talked about. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be lies. We worked different sections that week, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. It was annoying, honestly. I'd come out here to escape complicated feelings, and now I was developing them for a coworker I'd barely met. I threw myself into the work, letting the physical exhaustion drown out everything else. There's something almost meditative about felling trees when you do it right. You read the lean, plan your cuts, feel the tree's weight and balance. Then comes that moment when it starts to go, that crack and groan as it surrenders to gravity. For those few seconds, nothing else exists. It was a Thursday when I found the first note. I'd been assigned to clear a section that Mason's crew had marked the week before. The trees were tagged with the standard orange paint, indicating which ones needed to come down. I was setting up my first cut of the day on a massive Douglas fir when I noticed something odd. There was a small rectangular piece of paper tucked into the bark, sealed in a plastic bag and wedged into a natural crack in the trunk. I pulled it out, curious. The handwriting was surprisingly neat for someone who worked with their hands all day. It said, "This one's about 300 years old. Probably saw the first settlers come through. Seems like she should be remembered." That was it. No signature, but I knew it was Mason. Something about those words, the gentleness in them, made my throat tight. I stood there for a long moment, holding this note from a man I didn't know, feeling like I'd been given a glimpse into something private. Mason wasn't just cutting down trees, he was bearing witness to them, honoring them in his own way. I carefully folded the note and put it in my pocket. Then I made my cuts with more reverence than usual. When the tree fell, I whispered a quiet thanks, feeling slightly ridiculous, but somehow knowing it was right. Over the next few weeks, I found more notes. Not in every tree, maybe one in every 10 or 15. Each one was different. Some were observations about the tree itself, the way its branches grew, or the ecosystem it supported. Some were more personal. One said, "Bad day today, but this tree has weathered worse storms than whatever I'm going through." Another said, "Saw an owl family in the hollow. Made sure to mark this one for preservation instead." I started looking forward to finding them, these small messages from Mason. It felt like we were having a conversation, even though he didn't know I was the one reading his words. I wondered if he left them for himself, a way of processing the weight of what we did for a living. Cutting down ancient trees isn't easy on the soul, even when it's necessary, even when it's done responsibly. Maybe the notes were his way of coping. I wanted to tell him I'd found them, but I didn't know how to start that conversation. What would I even say? "Hey, I've been reading your private thoughts that you left in trees." It sounded creepy when I put it like that. So I kept quiet and kept collecting them, storing them in a box in my trailer, reading them sometimes at night when the silence got too heavy. Then came the note that changed everything. It was late November, the air sharp with the promise of winter. I'd been working a ridgeline that offered a view of the entire valley, mountains rolling away in every direction. The tree was a western red cedar, its bark stringy and aromatic. The note said, "Sometimes I wonder if anyone else sees the beauty in this work, if anyone else feels the weight of it, if I'm alone in caring about these quiet giants." My hands shook as I read it. He wasn't alone. I cared. I saw it. But more than that, I realized I wanted to know him, really know him, not just his thoughts about trees, but everything. What he drank in the morning, what made him laugh, what his voice sounded like when he wasn't tired from a day's work. The realization scared me because I'd spent so long keeping people at arm's length. And now, here was this man I'd barely spoken to, pulling me towards something I'd convinced myself I didn't want. I made a decision. I pulled out my own notebook and wrote a response. "You're not alone. These notes, they've meant more to me than you know. The person reading this sees the beauty too. Sees it in the trees and, honestly, in the person who takes the time to honor them." I signed it with just my first initial, R, and tucked it into the same tree in a spot where he'd find it if he came back to check his work. Then I waited. Days passed with no response. I started to think maybe he wouldn't come back, or maybe he had and decided not to engage. Maybe I'd overstepped. I went through every possible scenario in my head, most of them ending in embarrassment or rejection. It was a Monday morning, almost 2 weeks later, when I saw him again at the depot. I was loading up my truck, trying not to look around for him, when I heard boots on gravel behind me. I turned, and there he was, standing a few feet away, holding a piece of paper. My note. "This you?" he asked. His voice was deeper than I'd imagined, rough from years of mountain air and probably too many cigarettes. My mouth went dry. "Yeah, that's me." He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then the corner of his mouth lifted in this small, almost shy smile. I was hoping it was. We stood there in the cold morning air, the sounds of the depot fading into background noise. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I've been leaving those notes for 3 years, he said quietly. "Never thought anyone would find them, let alone understand them." "I have a box full of them," I admitted. "In my trailer. I kept everyone." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hope. "Yeah? Yeah. They're beautiful, Mason. The way you see things, the way you put it into words. It's like you're writing love letters to the forest." He looked down, almost embarrassed. "That probably sounds crazy." "No," I said firmly. "It sounds like someone who cares, like someone who feels things deeply and isn't afraid to acknowledge it." He raised his eyes to mine again, and this time I saw it clearly. The same pull I'd been feeling, reflected back at me. "You want to get coffee sometime?" he asked. "Like actual coffee, not the sludge they serve here." I felt a smile spread across my face. I'd really like that. We exchanged numbers, made plans for Saturday, and then went our separate ways for the day's work. But everything felt different. The forest felt different. I felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't just going through the motions. I was moving towards something, towards someone, and it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Saturday came, and I changed my shirt 3 times before settling on a plain blue Henley that didn't look like I was trying too hard. We met at a small coffee shop in the nearest town, a place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Mason was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking almost nervous. It was endearing, seeing this confident, capable man uncertain about a coffee date. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hey." He pushed a cup toward me. "Wasn't sure what you'd want, so I got you a regular coffee. Hope that's okay." "It's perfect." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to do with him. We started talking and didn't stop for 3 hours. We covered everything, the surface stuff first, where we grew up, how we ended up in logging, what we did when we weren't working. He was from a small town in Montana, had come west after his dad died, needed a fresh start. I told him about my degree in environmental science, how I'd ended up in logging because I wanted to understand the industry from the inside, see if there was a way to do it better. But then the conversation went deeper. He told me about the loneliness of the work, how he'd chosen it specifically because it kept him away from people, how he'd never quite fit in anywhere, always felt like he was pretending to be someone he wasn't. I understood that more than he knew. "Can I ask you something?" I said, my heart picking up speed. "Anything." "Why did you hope it was me? Who wrote that note?" He looked down at his coffee, then back up at me with this raw honesty in his eyes. "Because I noticed you that first day at the depot, and then I kept noticing you, the way you work, careful and respectful, the way you look at the mountains like they matter, and I thought, maybe here's someone who might understand, someone who might see me the way I was starting to see him." The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. This was it, the moment where I could acknowledge what this was or retreat back to safety. "I see you, Mason," I said quietly. "I've been seeing you for months now, through your notes and now sitting here, and I want to keep seeing you. If that's something you want too." He reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and the simple touch sent electricity through my entire body. That's exactly what I want. We left the coffee shop hand in hand, and he drove us up into the mountains to a spot he said he'd been wanting to show someone. It was a clearing overlooking the valley, the same view I'd seen from that ridgeline where I found his note about loneliness. We sat on the tailgate of his truck, shoulders touching, watching the sun move across the sky. "I've never done this before," he said after a while. "Been with a guy, I mean. I've known for a long time what I wanted, but I never had the courage to reach for it." "Me neither," I admitted. "I mean, I had a boyfriend in college, but it was secret. We never told anyone, and after it ended, I convinced myself it was easier to just be alone." "Is this scary for you?" he asked. "Terrifying," I said honestly, "but also the best thing I've felt in years." He turned to look at me, really look at me, and then he was kissing me. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was asking permission. I kissed him back, my hand coming up to his jaw, feeling the scratch of his beard against my palm. The kiss deepened, and I felt something in my chest crack open, all the walls I'd built crumbling under the weight of this moment. When we pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. He rested his forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I saw you." "You should have," I said, making him laugh. We spent the rest of the day together, talking more, kissing more, learning the shape of each other. By the time he drove me back to my truck, the sun was setting, and I felt like a different person than I'd been that morning. Like I'd finally stepped into my own life instead of watching it from a distance. The next few months were the happiest I'd ever been. We fell into a routine, spending our days working separate sections of the forest and our nights together. Sometimes at his place, a small cabin he rented on the edge of the national forest. Sometimes at my trailer. It didn't matter where we were as long as we were together. He taught me things I never would have learned from any textbook. How to read the forest, really read it, understanding the relationships between trees, the way they communicate through their root systems, the balance of the ecosystem. He showed me his favorite spots, places he'd found over years of wandering these mountains. Hidden waterfalls, meadows full of wildflowers in spring, a grove of old-growth hemlock that felt like a cathedral. I taught him things too, the science behind what we both felt instinctively. We'd talk for hours about forest management, sustainability, the ethics of logging. He'd never thought of himself as an environmentalist, but that's exactly what he was. He just expressed it differently, through action and reverence rather than policy and protest. But more than any of that, we taught each other how to be vulnerable, how to let someone in. Mason had spent so long protecting himself from hurt that he'd forgotten how to be open. I watched him slowly unfold, becoming more expressive, more willing to share his thoughts and feelings, and I had to learn to do the same, to trust that he wouldn't use my honesty against me, that it was safe to want this, to want him. We still left notes in the trees, but now they were for each other. Love letters hidden in the forest where we'd found each other. I'd find one that said, "You make the hard days bearable and the good days perfect." He'd find one from me that said, "I love you more than I knew I could love anything." We were building our own private language, written in the margins of our work. One evening in March, we were at his cabin cooking dinner together. It was snowing outside, big fat flakes that caught the light from the windows. Mason was at the stove, making his grandmother's recipe for beef stew, and I was setting the table. It was so domestic, so normal, and yet it felt revolutionary. This was my life now. This was real. "Move in with me," he said suddenly, not looking up from the pot he was stirring. I froze, a plate in my hand. "What?" "Move in with me," he repeated, turning to face me now. "I know it's fast, but Reed, I don't want to spend another night without you here. This cabin is just a building, but when you're in it, it's home." I set the plate down carefully, my hands shaking. "Are you sure? This is a small town. People will figure it out. They'll know we're together." "Let them know," he said firmly. "I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending. I want to live my life with you, openly, and if people have a problem with that, they can take it up with me." I crossed the small kitchen and wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his neck. "Yes," I said against his skin. "Yes, I'll move in with you." He held me tight, and I felt his chest shake with either laughter or tears, maybe both. We stood there for a long time, the stew forgotten, just holding each other while snow fell outside and the future stretched out before us, uncertain but ours. Moving in together was easier than I expected. I didn't have much, just books and clothes and that box of notes. Mason helped me move everything in one afternoon, and suddenly his space was our space. Our books mixed together on the shelf, our boots lined up by the door, our lives intertwined in 1,000 small ways. The response from the other loggers was mixed. Some guys didn't care, just shrugged and kept doing their work. Some were supportive in that gruff, masculine way, clapping us on the shoulder and saying good for you. And some made it clear they weren't comfortable with it. There were a few tense moments, some muttered comments, but Mason handled it all with a calm confidence that made me fall even more in love with him. "I've been doing this work longer than most of them," he told me one night after a particularly awkward day. "I'm better at it than most of them, and I'm not going anywhere. They'll adjust or they won't, but I'm not changing who I am for their comfort." His strength gave me strength. I stopped worrying so much about what people thought and started just living. We held hands in town. We went to the local bar together. We existed as a couple, openly and unapologetically, and slowly it became normal. Just Mason and Reed, the loggers who lived together up on the mountain. Spring turned to summer, and we spent our weekends hiking, exploring more of the vast wilderness we worked in. Mason showed me a lake he'd found years ago, so remote that we didn't see another person the entire day. We swam in the freezing water and lay on the rocks to dry, his hand finding mine, fingers intertwined. Thank you, he said, eyes closed against the sun. For what? For reading my notes. For responding. For seeing me. He turned his head to look at me. I was so lonely before you, Reed. I didn't even realize how lonely until I wasn't anymore. I was lonely too, I said. I just didn't know what I was lonely for until I found it. In July, we took a week off and drove to the coast. It was the first real vacation either of us had taken in years. We stayed in a tiny beach cottage and spent our days walking the shore, collecting shells, watching the sunset over the Pacific. It was different from our mountains, but beautiful in its own way. Mason was different there too, more relaxed, laughing easier. I took a picture of him standing at the edge of the water, waves washing over his feet, his face turned toward the horizon. It's still my favorite photo. On our last night, we built a fire on the beach and sat close, sharing a blanket. I want to do this forever, Mason said. Not just this week, but this. Us. Building a life together. Me too, I said. I want all of it. The ordinary days and the special ones. I want to grow old with you. He kissed me, tasting like salt and smoke, and I felt that same certainty I'd felt the day we met. This was right. This was home. Not a place, but a person. We went back to work, back to the rhythm of our lives. But everything felt richer now, more meaningful. We were building something together, not just a relationship, but a future. We talked about eventually starting our own sustainable logging company, one that prioritized conservation and reforestation. It was a dream, but it felt possible with Mason beside me. One October morning, exactly a year after I'd found his first note, I woke up before dawn. Mason was still asleep, his arm thrown over my waist. I carefully extracted myself and went outside, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sky lighten over the mountains. This year had transformed me. I'd gone from someone who was hiding from life to someone who was fully engaged in it. I'd found love in the last place I expected, carved into trees by a man who felt things deeply and wasn't afraid to honor them. Mason had taught me that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that opening your heart was the bravest thing you could do. The door opened behind me and he came out, wrapped in a blanket, sitting down next to me and pulling me against his chest. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Happy anniversary," he said quietly. "You remembered." Of course I remembered. 1 year since you found my note and decided to respond. Best decision either of us ever made. I twisted to look at him. I love you, Mason, more than I can put into words, which is ironic considering how we started. He smiled, that soft smile that was just for me. I love you too, and I'm going to keep leaving you notes, just so you know. In trees, on the fridge, wherever, because I never want to stop telling you how I feel. Good, I said, because I never want to stop reading them. We sat there as the sun rose fully, starting another day, another year, another chapter of this life we were building together. The mountains stretched out before us, full of trees that would someday need felling, and in some of them there would be notes. Love letters between two men who found each other in the forest, who learned to be brave enough to reach for happiness, who proved that sometimes the most unexpected places hold exactly what you've been looking for. I never expected to find love carved into the bark of 100-year-old trees, but that's exactly where Mason left it for me. And I'm grateful every single day that I was paying attention, that I was open enough to see it and brave enough to respond. Because this life, this love, this quiet happiness we've built, it's worth more than all the ancient timber in these mountains. It's everything.